he was a legend long before he got into this wrongful conviction business. I remember when he had that narrow escape from Beirut and, was nearly killed.
I don't know if you'd call him a rebel, but certainly he was someone that was more than willing to swim upstream, and I think that came to sort of define him over the years, particularly as someone who got involved in the wrongful conviction movement.
And here's a man that started out in 1966 being focused on social justice issues, particularly criminal justice issues, and who over the years had seen and understood some of the most outrageous examples of police and law enforcement misconduct, not only in this city, but across the entire nation.
Not only was he the first voice, but he was a very lonely voice for a long time on that score.
One of the things that Rob did that was unique in a way was that he was critical of prosecutors. And that sort of made him stand out because in large part people didn't criticize prosecutors in the press.
It was printed typically late at night out at the Daily Southton. The owner of that publication said we could use his press, but we could only use it when it was available. So he would call up at 10 o'clock in the morning and say, you can have the press literally from 1 to 3 a.m. tonight. So we would all go out there and we'd put out a newspaper.
So this first story that Warden did got the attention of some citywide press. Well, the John Schmidt, who was the main guy behind the publication, thought that's great, do more if you want.
The first story, though, about wrongful conviction, I do remember vividly because it was a story that came about, in a sense, I think by accident. A convicted murderer who was on death row at Menard wrote a letter to Chicago lawyer. I think it was just addressed Chicago lawyer, and in it, he set out why he was innocent.
The first thing that he wrote had to do with the Fort Heights 4 case, and then he moved on to Tillis and Cobb was the next one, and the next one after that was the Rolando Cruz case, and that was the case that a lot of us read the work of the Chicago lawyer and built on it. He did such important, high-profile work in this case that the Tribune picked up on it, the Sun-Times picked up on it, I certainly picked up on it, and all the work that was done calling the greater public's attention to the travesty of justice that had occurred in that case all stood on the shoulders of the work that Rob did.
The notion that people were locked up in jail for any number of crimes and were actually innocent, that was a shocking notion.
He was seeing the landscape. He understood it before any of us could even get a picture in our head about what it was all about. And he really kind of took that vision and turned it into reality.
When all of us got involved at the beginning of this innocence movement, there wasn't even a place to go to court. There wasn't one post-conviction DNA statute passed in this country. The right to get into court and prove your innocence was extremely limited. And what we always did was go pair up with a journalist and try to bring public pressure, because the Fourth Estate was the court of last resort, to get innocent people out of jail. And Rob not only understood this, he embodied it.
He's one of those people who believes that there's a truth to be told that's not yet fully known. And I would say that characteristic, that his belief in the undiscovered truth, really sort of unites both his journalistic career and his involvement at the center.
It's grounded in this very American adherence to the notion of the rule of law. And anything that's going to undermine the integrity of the rule of law, he feels he has to do something about it. So I think you combine the passion for people who have not been treated fairly and this adherence to the rule of law, and it sort of became natural that he was going to be the leader of this movement.
When you're on the side of what is right and when you are working as hard as you possibly can, you will succeed. Nothing is impossible.
In 1998, I think, the Innocence Conference, where all of a sudden it was like 500 people or something came to the school to talk about the death penalty, the possibility of innocent people being convicted.
But I came to the conference, and I remember that I could not find a parking place anywhere a mile away from the law school because there were so many media vehicles in the area.
The centerpiece of the whole event was a ritual that was orchestrated by a group of people, including Rob, where each of the wrongly convicted individuals, so they would get up and they would say,
"My name is Sonia Jacobs. The state of Florida sought to kill me for murder I did not commit. Had the state of Florida gotten its way, I would be dead today."
And then each person took a flower, a sunflower, and put it into a vase. And the crowd sort of each time, as it became more overpowering, how much human suffering and misery and how these weren't just the one-offs. Each time the applause would intensify and the tears would start coming. I mean, everybody in the crowd was crying. And we also wanted to drive home, and again, Rob had a feel for this, to drive home the commonality between these cases.
The state of Illinois sought to kill me for a murder I did not commit.
For a murder that I did not commit. I did not.
The power of that being repeated, however many times it was that day, was overwhelming.
It was so emotional. It was so powerful. I mean, remember, this was in the early days of the innocence movement. We were still even adjusting to the idea that there were innocent people in prison.
There was this visual display of a broken justice system in America.
Brian Stevenson, who is a national leader, one of the great voices in criminal justice in America, he said, when the history of the abolition of the death penalty is written, decades from now, the moment that will be identified as the catalyst for it all will be the moment in which we are sitting right now, today, at Northwestern Law School.
Something clearly changed when that conference took place, and that conference, I think, kicked off just a whole bunch of things, including the founding of the center.
There was basically a closet or a small room that was filled with unanswered letters from people all across the country claiming that they were actually innocent.
The center was, the legal work was Larry and then Jane and myself and our students, and Rob was writing and speaking and advocating.
There were so many facets that Rob took care of that were so important to the movement. Working with the legislators on law reform, working with the journalists on getting the story out, working with the state's attorney's office and commissions in terms of getting the message out.
He would have made a terrific trial lawyer because he's able to weave facts in a way to really get a reader's attention and to keep their attention.
Well, he was a remarkable teacher for whomever wanted to learn and to learn about this whole issue. And it was addictive to have that kind of enthusiasm and passion. It was never a 9-to-5 job for him or for anybody else that worked for him.
But he just has an instinct for how to approach these problems that most people just don't want to touch.
And I think that the fact that he was a journalist and not a lawyer was critical to the success of the center and critical to the road to abolition and to all those exonerations, which are now history.
I don't know anyone who's had more impact on more people's lives than Rob.
A few years ago, when one of our clients, a center client, was released from prison, he walked out of prison, into the arms of his family. But you know what he was carrying? He was carrying a book written by Robert Warden for the world to see, because that is who gave him hope in prison. It was the voice of Robert Warden, not afraid to say what they have been thinking all along.
Yes, it's nice that there's people looking out for the people that don't have a voice. Say, hey, this person needs an advocate, and he hasn't got one. And that's what Rob did. Him and the students and Larry, they became advocates for people that didn't have a voice, who were caught in the unjust parts of the system.
You know, I've often thought about that. That was one of my biggest fears, that I would be in prison and, you know, sitting there watching TV or whatever, listening to TV or radio or whatever, and they announced Dennis Williams was executed today. You know, it was really the first ray of light that I had to think that, you know, somebody out there is paying attention to to what happened to us. He just always came across to me as just a person that just, like as my wife said, just put on this earth to do this type of work.
I've been so amazed being at the center and watching him get a new piece of news and seeing him come out and celebrate it with everybody like it was his victory, his freedom. I think that's the part that I noticed the most. Every victory, every setback, it affected him personally, and he treated it like it was his own victory or his own little setback, and he continued to push forward.
I have to believe he was chosen for this journey as a drum major, as a person that has integrity and honor as his character foundation. I've never been a number. I always treated me like I was a human being, a person. He brings the integrity and honor and the humanity as a face for those who have been wrong.
I think that Rob just offered tremendous hope to Rolando. Rolando tells me that he never, ever had a day when he thought that he wouldn't get out. And I think that it's in large part due to Rob that Rolando was able to have that positive attitude while he was still incarcerated, that it wouldn't always be like that.
So why would he, stand up for me? It's because he hates injustice. Rob is, he cares so much about humanity that he would, and he hates injustice, that he does what he does about the death penalty.
And I remember going to Rob's house and, having chili and, just telling them like, look, I really don't just want to come through this and keep going and not, help and assist and keeping it from happening. I want to be an attorney. And he looked at me with a straight face and he said, you know what, you can do it. And, here it is, the year that he's being retired and stuff. I graduate the following year from Loyola Law School, so it's a beautiful thing,
Everybody, you feel like you're the only one he's helping, and yet he's helping thousands of people.
You can make a list of all the people that Rob Warden has helped, and the Center of Wrongful Convictions has helped free, but you can never make a list of all the people who they didn't have to help free, because the system has reformed itself and is working better because of their efforts over the years.
The part that blows me away about Rob is the fact that he's stayed with this for as long as he has. Just, again, it's that bulldog tenacity that I am going to stay and fight as long as I have breath left in me.
Every case where we get out, the first thing he does is get on the computer and start to write and tell everybody about it. He puts out the letter.
I think what Rob knows is that when you convict the wrong person for a murder, you have left the real murderer out there on the streets. You have not done justice for the family members of the victims by putting the real perpetrator away, and you have left that real killer free to go and victimize another innocent family. He gets that wrongful convictions are as much a victim's issue as they are an issue for defendants.
There are many ways for us to look at how do we change the parts of society that outrage us, and to call it out and to name it and to hold people accountable for it. And that's what Rob has really done so effectively and so beautifully.
All these guys that he's helped get off death row or out of prison, he genuinely just wants to make their lives better. He wants to help them because he believes that they didn't really have a chance.
Part of the history of wrongful conviction is also a kind of side assault on the death penalty.
People have declining confidence in the death penalty, the accuracy of the death penalty. Rob Warden was one of those early advocates pushing that, often against other abolitionists who saw it as a kind of betrayal of the cause. It's another great thing about Rob Warden. He's driven by principle, the highest principle, but I think Rob's also a pragmatist at his heart. He will do what he has to do to get the job done.
You say, well, Illinois doesn't have the death penalty anymore. Like somebody one day came up and said, okay, let's get rid of the death penalty. Okay, yeah, it's gone. That isn't what happened. This was a huge effort on behalf of many people, including the Center on Wrongful Convictions and Rob Warden.
I was sitting in the mansion with my wife watching the news from Chicago when he was released, and they said that here he was, an innocent man decided by the courts, and was freed. And he'd spent 15 years on death row or thereabouts. And I looked at my wife and said, how does that happen in America? How does somebody spend 15 years of their life on death row and then be found innocent? There's something wrong with the system that doesn't work better than that.
I came to the absolute conclusion that it was not a deterrent, because if it was a deterrent, nobody in Harris County, Texas would ever kill anybody. They'd take them over the border to some other county.
There's a poster here on the wall of the day that Governor Ryan announced that blanket clemency in Lincoln Hall here at Northwestern, to see that moment in history, and I think Rob had everything to do with that.
I didn't want to look back in 5 years after I'd left office, knowing that maybe an innocent person had been executed because I failed to act.
Paula Gray was this young woman who had been kind of coerced by the state into testifying against all of these innocent men, some into prison and some onto death row. And she later recanted this false testimony she had given, and for that the state rewarded her by locking her up for perjury, for telling the truth that these men were innocent. And when all of this was announced, Dennis Williams, this man who had been put on death row by her, crossed the room to embrace her. He went to her in this moment of mercy and forgiveness for her. And it was this kind of microcosm of this larger mercy that was shown that day. And it all, I think, never would have happened without a voice as strong and steady as Rob Warden.
And so when you look back in 2011, when the death penalty was finally abolished in Illinois, and you look back and people were, taking their star turns and their bows and so on, just about all of them could trace their energy, their work in this area back to that original landmark, groundbreaking, brave work that Rob was doing in challenging the legal community. He was daring to say that people who were in prison for horrible crimes were actually innocent.
And in the last few years, he's been able to take these causes of wrongful convictions and translate that into recommendations for reform.
You win people's hearts by telling the stories of victims of injustice. And from there, you can work toward organizing people to want to change the system and make it better.
Some of the issues that I've been addressing, they'll help prevent wrongful convictions, no question, and they'll also make sure that we get the right person and that the justice system is more efficient.
Barack Obama personally took the issue of recording custodial interrogations and got the first bill in the United States passed requiring that they record custodial interrogations of people suspected of homicide.
The innocence movement has spawned so many different fields of psychology now that study confirmation bias and tunnel vision and all these things that help us understand how we as humans know so little about our own limitations.
But one of the great contributions that Rob has made with our colleague Sam Gross and all the people at the Registry of Exonerations is that we're counting. For the first time, we're counting.
We thought the wrongful conviction was the anomaly, was the rare exception. And then you put together this database and you're thinking, oh my goodness, we have a much bigger problem than we ever realized.
As of the Innocence Network Conference, there are 1,350 exonerations in the National Registry of Exonerations.
It's important
for the people who were involved, the exonerees, to have their stories told. But it's really important for the criminal justice system and for society generally to be able to learn about how we make mistakes so we can avoid them and correct them.
1,350 exonerations is on average, this is since 1989, this is on average once a week for 25 years. Someone has been exonerated in this country for a crime they did not commit. 20% of those were not crimes at all. There was no crime.
Well, I think there'd be a gaping hole in the movement if he hadn't made the choices he made to be involved with it. You know, there are those people in the movement that really do the work, and there are those people in the movement who add their names. Rob does the work, always has.
Well, I think Rob was such a catalyst between the legal community, our justice system, and the public that I'm not sure we would have had the same exposure to the issues that are of concern to us in wrongful convictions if Rob had not been part of the wrongful conviction movement.
I can't imagine that there's anybody else who would have been able to pull all of this together in such a remarkable way.
He's not a lawyer, but he might as well be, because he knows these cases and he knows the law better than most of the lawyers do.
Probably one of the most dedicated people I've met in this process for make sure that people that are convicted are guilty and the innocent aren't executed. And Rob's dedicated his life to this.
The history of the justice system in the 21st century should have a chapter on Rob and Larry.
My connection with Rob changed the trajectory of my, professional career. It taught me that the law is by no means exclusively in the books, that the law is a reflection of the public ethos.
And I think of him as the most influential journalist in human rights in my lifetime.
He leaves so many people behind him who have been inspired by him, who have been emboldened by him and so on, that I'm confident that this work will go on.
He'll be writing articles and book reviews and doing investigations and getting innocent people out of jail and providing all the same guidance and leadership that he has in the past. Just in a different place, in a different era, in a different time for him. And, but that's all to our great benefit. He is by no means stepping off the stage.
I think that's, in some ways, the lesson of Rob's career. You can change the world if you pursue an obsession with that kind of tenacity, and you turn out to be right. You have to be right, but he was right.
Rob came into our lives at the right time, and he helped free us. And it's unbelievable that he's retiring, but who knows? Who knows?